Hi everyone, welcome back to Margaret's house. I hope you're doing well. Today's a very special video because I thought it would be nice to get into the Thanksgiving holiday spirit together and share my 3 favorite Thanksgiving recipes with you. These are recipes for 3 dishes that I have really taken on as my responsibility for Thanksgiving. The past few years, my mom and mother-in-law of course take on all of the main things like the turkey and the main events of the day. But I really love to bake pies and bread for Thanksgiving. I feel like that's where I thrive in baking anyway, and they're some of the coziest things to bake, so I kind of take that off their plate and bake the pies and dinner rolls for Thanksgiving. So these are recipes that some are very near and dear to my heart, family recipes, and others are recipes that I've found online at different places that I've really come to trust and rely on and bake year after year. So I look forward to baking these recipes every year, and I just thought they would be nice to share with you in case you're needing a new recipe to kind of switch things up in an area for Thanksgiving, or if you just need someone to be cozy with you and bake along with you as you're getting ready for the holidays. So all that to say, the 3 recipes that we're going to be baking are a pecan pie, a pumpkin pie, and then homemade dinner rolls. My recipe for pecan pie is one that is very special to me and very near and dear to my heart. It's actually a recipe written by my great-grandmother Margaret, whom I'm named after and who also really inspired me to create Margaret's house in the first place, so it felt like a really special recipe to get to share with y'all. But this recipe has been in my family for generations, and now it's kind of become my responsibility, so it's something that I really cherish making every year, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this special recipe with y'all. It's nothing crazy. I'm sure you can find other recipes like it out there, but I always refer back to the recipe card that my grandmother wrote, and it's in her beautiful cursive handwriting, so it just makes me happy to get to bake from every year, and I'm going to share it with y'all just as my great-grandmother would make it and just as I make it every year. It's so delicious. It's a bourbon pecan pie, so the bourbon really adds a level of richness and depth of flavor, and it's just so silky and smooth and caramely and delicious. And I've actually typed up this recipe for my great-grandmother Margaret's pecan pie on my website, so if you're interested in having a written out recipe to follow while you bake along with me, that will be linked in the description for the recipe on my website. And I also do have to say, for the pecan pie, I'm choosing to use store-bought crust just for the pecan pie because I'm making actually quite a few of these for the Thanksgiving meal for soldiers who don't have families here for my husband's army unit. So I'm making lots of pecan pies, and it just kind of streamlines it to be able to make them in store-bought crust, but I thought it would also work out well because it's like Ina Garten says, sometimes store-bought is fine, and I do think that for pies on Thanksgiving especially, you don't have to make your dough from scratch in order to have a really delicious and special pie to serve your guests. And that leads me into the second pie that I'm going to make, which is a pumpkin pie, and the recipe is by Claire Saffitz via the New York Times. Claire Saffitz is a baker that I admire so much. I love all of her recipes, I love her cookbooks, and I think she's a very skilled, talented baker, so I trust any recipe that she writes. It always turns out so delicious for me. And I'm also going to be using her recipe for homemade pie crust, which she also wrote for the New York Times, so I'll link both of those recipes in the description below. But the reason that I really love this recipe and I wanted to share it with y'all is when I was younger, I hated pumpkin pie so much. I despised it. I did not want anything to do with it at Thanksgiving, and I think what I hated about it is the raw pumpkin taste in a pumpkin pie. It's never something that I've loved, and ever since pumpkin pie became my job on Thanksgiving, I set out to kind of find a recipe that I love and just can't wait to indulge in on Thanksgiving. So that's this recipe for me. The reason that I really love it is because Claire uses a lot of techniques that are akin to making a custard in order to make the pie filling. So it kind of leans towards a vanilla bean custard, which is one of my all-time favorite desserts, and it really has this luxurious vanilla-y spicy flavor to it, and it's such a soft, silky silky smooth pie. So I absolutely love this recipe. It has changed the game for making pumpkin pie. Everyone raves about it anytime that I share it with guests or bring it to a Thanksgiving meal. So I thought it would be a fun one to share in case you are like me and you don't love a classic pumpkin pie and it leaves you with something to be desired. Maybe switch it up this year and try this pie. And like I said, for this pie, I am gonna make a homemade pie dough. If I have the time to do it, I really do feel like it adds such a special element to the pie, and I'm actually gonna be doubling the recipe because I was inspired by a pie that Martha Stewart made where she lined the top of her pie with cut out little leaves made of pie dough, and I'm gonna make some extra pie dough so that I can use that to make decorations for my pumpkin pie. But like I said, I'll link everything in the description below in case you want to use any of these recipes. And then the last recipe that I'm gonna make is homemade dinner rolls. These are some of my favorite things to bake ever. Y'all know I love fresh bread, and bread is one of my very favorite things to bake in general. But I think on Thanksgiving, it's a really good thing to delegate out to someone who maybe doesn't have as much responsibility getting things ready on Thanksgiving Day. I don't feel like everyone prioritizes homemade dinner rolls at Thanksgiving dinner, but if someone is willing to make them, it's just that extra special touch. So I love contributing homemade dinner rolls. There's so many delicious recipes out there, but what I've found is that I really just want a simple, fluffy, delicious dinner roll on Thanksgiving. I want it to be light, melt in your mouth with beautiful flaky salt and butter on top. Keep it simple, but so melt in your mouth delicious. My favorite recipe that I found for homemade dinner rolls is by John Cannell from Preppy Kitchen. So I will link his recipe below so that you can reference that. Yeah, that's what we're gonna be baking today. I'm gonna start with baking the pie dough because that has to go in the fridge for a couple of hours. So I think that that will get us into a good rhythm of baking for the day. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome to my kitchen. Like I said, we are gonna start with the pie crust. So for this recipe, the first thing that we're gonna do is combine all of the dry ingredients together. You're gonna need 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour, but I'm doubling the recipe, so I'm gonna do 3 cups of all-purpose flour, then 1 tablespoon of sugar. Again, I'm doubling, so I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons, and 1 teaspoon of diamond kosher salt or baking salt. I'm going to use 2 teaspoons. Okay, now that all of our dry ingredients is mixed together, I'm going to add in the butter, which is a crucial part to a pie dough. It's what gives it tenderness and flakiness. The recipe calls for 10 tablespoons of ice cold butter, and since I'm doubling it, I'm going to use 20 tablespoons of butter. Now we're gonna add in 1/3 of a cup of this ice water that I've been chilling. And then I'm just gonna pour it into a well in the center of my flour butter mixture. we have our pie doughs. They're all wrapped tightly in saran wrap, and they're gonna go into the fridge for at least 2 hours. You could do even longer, or you could chill them overnight or even weeks ahead of time. Just make sure that if they're in the freezer, you pull them out a little bit ahead of time to slightly defrost. But for me, I'm gonna put this in the fridge for 2 hours, and it will be nice and chilly for us to make our pumpkin pie. Okay, now that our pie dough is all done and chilling in the fridge, now I want to start on the dinner rolls because they need a little bit of time to rise, and I think that works out to kind of have the two doughs going at the same time. For our dinner rolls, y'all know I do love my little green KitchenAid. I use it for everything, and it is one of my favorite parts of my kitchen. But I personally find that for any kind of bread dough, I really do enjoy making it by hand more. I find that my mixer can kind of struggle and get close to breaking if I do my dough in there and I'm not super careful. And I also just really enjoy kneading dough by hand, and I think it's a really special part of the process of making homemade bread. So I'm gonna make it in a bowl. You could also do it in a stand mixer with the dough hook if you have that. Like I said before, this recipe is by John Cannell of Preppy Kitchen. He is a baker that I really love and admire and trust. So I will link his recipe below so that you can follow along through there if you would like. So for this recipe, the first things that we're gonna combine are the warm milk and the yeast. So I have a jug of organic whole milk. So I have a cup of organic whole milk, and I'm gonna warm this up in the microwave for a few seconds until it's pretty warm, about 110 degrees. If you have a thermometer, you can measure that. If not, just make sure it's nice and warm but not quite like piping hot. I'm gonna use my bread bowl. This is my favorite bowl to make bread in, and it's passed down again from my great-grandmother Margaret, so it's only fitting. And I'm also gonna use a Danish dough whisk. I find it so helpful. This one is from Ballerina Farms. Okay, so I warmed up the milk in the microwave for about a minute and a half. And now I'm gonna pour it right into our bread bowl. And then for yeast in this recipe, we're gonna use a package of rapid rise yeast. You wanna make sure that you get the rapid rise because there's a few different yeasts in packages like this that you'll see at the grocery store. But for this recipe, we wanna make sure to have the rapid rise, which is this blue package. And I'm gonna sprinkle it right into the warm milk in our bowl. Now that we have mixed up our yeast and milk mixture, we're gonna add in 5 tablespoons of unsalted softened butter, 1 large egg, 1 teaspoon of salt. I really love this Diamond Crystal baking salt because the granules are very small and really combine into the bread mixture really well. There's not gonna be lumps of salt here and there, so I really love this for baking, but especially for baking bread. Then we're gonna do 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and this isn't gonna make the rolls actually taste sweet. They're gonna have the tiniest bit of sweetness that you do want in a really melt in your mouth dinner roll, but the sugar helps to make the rolls nice and fluffy and soft, similar to a cupcake or a cake. And then lastly, we're gonna add in 1.5 cups of flour. There's actually 3.5 cups of flour total in this recipe, but we're gonna start with just adding 1.5 cups and then get it all mixed together, and then slowly add in more flour. Okay, so our dough is nice and mixed. The consistency is almost like a batter, but you can tell it's a bit thicker and it's gonna be a bread dough. You just wanna mix it until everything is super smooth and combined. There's no little lumps or pieces of flour left. So now you wanna scrape down the sides of the bowl, and we're gonna slowly add in another 1.75 cups of flour, and just keep on mixing it so that it stays nice and combined with no flour lumps. Definitely a labor of love, that's for sure. our dough is ready to be proofed. I ended up kneading it by hand for about 20 minutes. So if you're doing it in the stand mixer, you could probably put it in there for about 5 minutes or so until it's tacky and forming a ball around the dough hook. A good test to see if it's done and ready to be proofed is called the window pane test. So you tear off a little piece of it, hold it up to the light, and if you can see light coming through it without it tearing, that means you've formed enough gluten to have it begin to proof and rise. So I'm gonna put my dough ball back into this bowl. It's lightly oiled and ready for it to rise. And a little trick that I do, since it's so cold for me in Colorado and our kitchen pretty much stays fairly chilly throughout the day, while I'm kneading my dough, I will preheat it to the lowest temperature. So for me, my oven goes to 170, that's the lowest, and I'll let it preheat, reach that temperature, then turn it off and let it cool down for a little bit, and that just kind of creates a warm, dry place for my dough to rise. So I'm gonna go ahead and stick it in the oven, and it's gonna rise for about 45 minutes to an hour until it's doubled in size. Okay, now it's time for the main event. This is always the recipe of Thanksgiving that is most special to me to bake, and I can't have a Thanksgiving without this recipe. It's my great-grandmother Margaret's pecan pie, and like I said, the recipe is up on my website, so if you want to bake along with me, you can find the recipe there. This recipe is super simple to make though. So like I said, I'm gonna be using the pre-made pie crust for this recipe, so it's just in the freezer and it'll stay frozen until we pour the filling into it. This recipe is mostly made over the stove top, so you want to get a small saucepan and put it over about medium heat. Now to our sauce pot, we're going to be adding 1 cup of corn syrup. This recipe calls for dark corn syrup because I think it adds just a little bit of a darker, richer flavor and gives it a little bit more of a caramely flavor, so we like that in my family, but you could do light if you prefer. Then we're gonna add in 6 tablespoons of butter, 3/4 cup of sugar, and then lastly 2 tablespoons of bourbon. I'm just gonna use Jim Beam bourbon. It doesn't have to be anything super fancy or expensive, and the bourbon will cook out as you bake it, so if you don't drink alcohol, you don't have to worry about this being in the recipe, but it definitely gives it that darker, richer flavor that you really are looking for with a caramely, yummy pecan pie. And so we really like this addition in my family. This is my grandmother's classic addition to the recipe that we all laugh about every year. It's so her to have added this in, but it really does make the whole pie just that much more rich and flavorful and delicious. So I really wouldn't skip the bourbon, but you could if you prefer to not have it. And we're gonna get that all whisked together and combined on the stove so that it's all melty and delicious together. This is classic military spouse. I'm making pecan pie and I can hear the revelry playing outside on the army base. It's honestly really sweet though, especially because my husband's gone right now on a training rotation, and it makes me think of him every time I hear it. But all that to say, I wanted to make sure to tell y'all I forgot an ingredient earlier, which is vanilla bean paste. Y'all know I could never have a baked good without vanilla bean paste, so my grandmother didn't originally call for that, but I really enjoy it in this recipe and my mom and I have always put it. So I'm gonna add in about a tablespoon or so of vanilla bean paste to our mixture melting on the stove. Okay, so now for the next part of our mixture for our pecan pie, we're going to get a ceramic bowl. You want it to be a bowl that can withstand quite a bit of heat because we're going to be eventually pouring this mixture into this bowl. So to begin with, you want to crack 3 large eggs into this bowl and whisk them really well together. I'm also going to put in a little bit of salt. My great-grandmother, when she originally wrote this recipe, just calls for a dash. About half a teaspoon of salt, I would say. So salt and eggs, whisk them all together, and then we're going to temper the eggs. So you want to add in little by little parts of the hot mixture into the eggs so that the eggs don't cook. And then that way when you add in the whole rest of the hot mixture, the eggs will be nice and luscious and make it all so rich and creamy. So be careful with that step. Okay, we have our mixture all ready to go. It smells absolutely amazing, and it's really not so hard if you're just patient with it and take your time. So now the last step is I have out my frozen pie crust, and the Marie Callender's one, you just bake it frozen. So make sure to check if you are using a pre-made, frozen, or refrigerated pie crust. See what those instructions say in regards to baking. But mine is just ready to go as is. Now for the pecan element of this pie, we are going to use a bag of chopped pecans. You want 2.5 cups of pecans, whether you want halves or chopped, that's up to you. I'm going to pour this entire bag of chopped pecans in the bottom of our pie dish, and then we will pour over our wet mixture, and some of the pecans will kind of rise to the top, others will stay throughout, and it just makes it the most luscious, delicious pecan pie. I seriously cannot get over how beautiful this pecan pie turns out every time. It's so easy to make. All of these pecans have floated to the top so beautifully, and we have our luscious mixture in there. So now it's ready to go into the oven, and it's going to bake for 45 minutes at 350 degrees. Okay, it is definitely dark out now. I feel like with daylight savings, it just all of a sudden is pitch dark outside. So I knew that the sun was probably gonna set while we were filming this video, so we don't really have our lovely natural light anymore. But I'm not too sad about it because I feel like this is so Thanksgiving-y to me. My family always has a later Thanksgiving meal. We normally do dinner, and we normally eat dinner for Thanksgiving around like 8 or 8:30. I have no idea how people do Thanksgivings earlier in the day. My husband's family eats a lot earlier in the day, and I find it to be so impressive because me and my mom and my grandma, when we are cooking together, we are never ready by lunchtime or mid-afternoon. It's always dinner, and it's always a late dinner, but it's so fun because we really enjoy just getting to cook together all day, and it really feels like a full special day of cooking a meal together. So it's only fitting that the sun has set now and we're having a cozy evening baking our Thanksgiving pies and rolls together. I poured a little glass of red wine just to be extra cozy and feeling extra Thanksgiving-y, and I've put on the TV the movie The Family Stone, which I know it's technically a Christmas movie, but something about everyone coming home and having a meal together, just that movie's always felt so Thanksgiving-y to me for some reason. So my mom and I always watch that around this time of year. So I went ahead and put The Family Stone on the TV. So if you see the lights flashing, that's what it is. And I have my glass of red wine. The sun has set, and it just feels super cozy. We have our pecan pie in the oven, and I think that our rolls are just about done rising. So we can go check that out, put our little dough balls together, and then we'll make our pumpkin pie. Cheers if you're baking along with me, if it's Thanksgiving or you're just having a cozy night. Here we are having a cozy holiday evening together. Okay, our dough is all ready for the grand reveal. It looks so nice and fluffy. It definitely doubled in size, and it just feels so light and airy and good. I always love a nice puffy dough like this. I'm gonna go ahead and grease my baking sheet. I'm just using a big Pyrex pan like this. This recipe makes about 15 rolls, so just make sure that you choose a pan that's big enough for that. You could just do a sheet pan or a casserole dish that you have that is big enough for 15 rolls. They're definitely gonna grow into each other, but they'll be nice and yummy and pull apart. I'm going to dump out our dough ball onto the counter, and I'm gonna roll it out just slightly. I don't really want to knock any air out of it, but just into like a fairly even little rectangle so that we can cut even pieces out of it. Bowie is definitely my sous chef. He keeps getting right next to me while I'm working with the dough, so he's got flour all over him. Good job, Bowie. Okay, here are all of our little dough balls. I ended up getting 17 little dough balls because I sort of cut it unevenly, but yeah, I think they look really great. Now they're gonna proof for another 30 to 45 minutes until they're doubled in size. So I'm going to cover them with a damp cloth and leave it by my oven since we have it on for the pies, and it'll get to rise in this warm kind of area until it's doubled. Pecan pie is out of the oven and it is looking absolutely amazing. This is such a beautiful pie and I feel so proud of it every time I make it because it just looks like so classic, so stunning, so beautiful, and it's such a nostalgic pie to me. So even just the smell of it filling my house is bringing me so much joy. This recipe is just so simple for such high reward, and so I would really recommend it if you're looking for a fun pie to bake this Thanksgiving. The one thing about it is that you want to let it cool for a very long time because you want to take it out of the oven when it's just starting to set, so it's a little bit jiggly still, but the middle is not by any means like sloshing. You want to make sure to let it set for a couple of hours because that filling is going to cool and get nice and set so that you can get out a clean slice. And I can't wait to try some. So our rolls are doubled in size now and they look absolutely amazing, so fluffy. So I'm going to put them into a 350-degree oven for about 20 minutes until they're a deep golden color. Brush them with melted butter and then flaky sea salt whenever they come out of the oven. So let's put them in 20 minutes at 350 degrees. Okay, the rolls are done. They look so good, and I topped them with melted butter and some flaky Maldon sea salt. So I'm gonna try our first roll. I'm so excited. It's so warm and yummy. Let's just go for it and take a bite. Oh my, so good. Rolls might be the star of Thanksgiving for me. Like, I could just eat a whole plate of rolls. And now I have a whole batch of rolls for myself tonight. So cheers to that. Okay, now that our rolls are in the oven, let's get out our pie dough. Now I'm gonna let it sit out for a couple of minutes to kind of come to a little bit of a cooler temperature. That way we can mold it into the shape that we want. And then I'm going to pound it out a little bit with a rolling pin. Roll it out to about just under 1/4 of an inch thick, so pretty thin, but you wanna make sure it's not too thin so that it doesn't crack and break while you're putting it into the pie pan. Then we are going to put it in the freezer for about 10 to 15 minutes to firm up and get to a really nice firm place so that it holds the shape that we've made it into. I finished rolling out my pie and making the crust and the leaves on the crust. It turned out so pretty. I've actually never done the leaves like this on the crust, but I was saying this earlier, I saw it on Martha Stewart's pie episode and I was just so inspired, so I had to do it. I'm gonna put this in the freezer really quick and then I'll come tell you how I did the leaves because they were so easy. So I'm gonna put this in the freezer for 15 minutes and then I'll come back and chat to y'all about the leaves. Okay, I'm back. I was also covered in flour, so I got the flour off and the pie's in the freezer chilling. And I wanted to show y'all, these are my little pie dough stamps, and these were actually a wedding present from William Sonoma, but it's a set of 6 different fall kind of themed pie dough stamps. There's a little acorn, which is so cute. There's a pumpkin. There's this leaf, which is a little bit bigger. There's also an apple, and then there's the 2 leaves that I used for our pie today. So this is a maple leaf. I believe this is maybe an aspen leaf, but I just thought that the shapes of these worked really well together, so I ended up doing a pattern of 2 of these leaves and then 1 of these leaves. But they're so great because they're like a normal cookie cutter, so you just put it in and cut out the shape, but then it has this stamp, so you press it down and it stamps out the little veins of the leaves or like extra defining features of whatever shape it is. So it definitely inspired me to make more pies. I really want to get to use this little apple shape. Maybe I'll make an apple pie sometime in the holiday season. But yes, I just used those stamps and then I used an egg wash as kind of a glue between the pie crust and the leaves. So I just did 1 egg, a little bit of heavy cream, whisked it up, and then I just brushed it on the crust and then on the back of each leaf before I put it down. And freezing it will also help it to adhere. So once the pie comes out, we're gonna blind bake it. All we do is just before we put the filling in, we pretty much bake the dough all the way through. So I'm going to put foil over the pie crust and pour in some dried beans to use as my pie weight. It's just something to weigh down the pie so that that puffy pastry doesn't rise up and become a huge bubble. You want it to stay down so that you can put in your filling. And we're gonna bake it at 400 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes until the crust is starting to become golden brown when you lift up the foil. And then we're gonna bring it out of the oven, take out the foil and the pie weights, and we're gonna lower the oven temperature to 325 degrees, so much lower of a temperature than we originally bake it at. And we'll put it back in for about 20 to 25 minutes. And while it's in for that last portion of blind baking, we're going to make the filling because we want the filling to go in hot to the hot pie crust. So that's the plan. Okay, now that our pie dough is in for the last round of blind baking, I want to go ahead and start on the filling. So the first part of the filling that I want to do is the egg and sugar mixture, and then we're also going to do a part of the mixture on the stove, very similar to the pecan pie, but I want to go ahead and do this so that the eggs can start to come to room temperature, and then we'll move over to the saucepan. So what you're going to need for this part of the recipe, again, this is by Claire Saffitz on the New York Times, and I'll link it below. So I've cleaned out this same ceramic pitcher that I used for the pecan pie egg mixture, and I'm going to use it again. So that really hot mixture from the stove is going to be tempering the eggs in here, and you don't want your bowl to crack. So this is my trusty old baking pitcher, and into this bowl I'm going to crack 4 large eggs, then 1/4 cup of packed dark brown sugar. Then Claire's recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. I'm gonna do about a tablespoon of vanilla bean paste. I personally feel like the vanilla bean paste is what takes this over the top. Like I was saying earlier, I really love a pumpkin pie that leans on the same techniques and flavors as a vanilla custard, just kind of a spiced pumpkin-y vanilla custard. So I love to use vanilla bean paste in my pumpkin pie, and a lot of it, so that it really comes through and adds those vanilla bean flecks and flavors throughout our pie filling. Then we're gonna do 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of salt. Again, I'm gonna use this Diamond Crystal baking salt. It's super fine granules and works really well in pies and baked goods, so I'm gonna use this. And then I'm also going to include a teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. Claire's recipe calls for 1/2 teaspoon of ground allspice and then 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. I personally just like the convenience of pumpkin pie spice, and I find that I just use this so much more than buying all of those individual spices. So I'm going to increase the measurements of the spices in this recipe to a full teaspoon, and I'm just gonna use this pumpkin pie spice. So I'm gonna add that all to my pitcher and whisk it super well together so that there's no streaks at all, and we'll be ready to temper it whenever we make our stovetop part of the filling. Now we are going to make our stovetop mixture, which is super simple. It's just 2/3 cup of heavy cream, 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter, and then 1/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. And we're gonna put it all in a little sauce pot, just like we did with the pecan pie mixture. We'll heat it all up just until it's steaming and everything is melted and combined. And then we will temper it into the egg mixture. Now that we've combined everything, we're going to pour in 1 can of Libby's Pure Pumpkin. Okay, we have officially reached our final recipe of the evening. It has been such a cozy and lovely evening of baking Thanksgiving recipes with y'all. This last little recipe that I want to make is so simple, but I want to use it to top our pumpkin pie, and that is homemade whipped cream. I think this is such a special recipe to bake, especially if you are gifting someone a pie or any dessert, or going to someone's house for Thanksgiving. Contributing homemade whipped cream, even if that's all you bring to someone's house, I feel like that alone is a special addition. But also, if you make a homemade pie, this really just puts it over the top, and it's such low difficulty for high reward, especially if you have a KitchenAid stand mixer. It's so easy to just pop the ingredients in the stand mixer and keep your eye on it, let it whip up, and it really does all the work for you. I'm going to be making a vanilla bean whipped cream, and I'm going to be referencing the Preppy Kitchen recipe for this by John Cannell. All you need is 1 cup of super cold, heavy whipping cream. He calls for 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Y'all know I always substitute vanilla extract for vanilla bean paste. It's my absolute favorite addition to any baked goods, so of course I love it in whipped cream, and it is extra special in whipped cream because you can really see those vanilla bean flecks throughout. He also calls for 1 to 3 tablespoons of powdered sugar, and this is dependent on how sweet you like your whipped cream. So I think I'm gonna go for 1, maybe 2 to start with, and if I want it to be sweeter, I can always add in more, but you can't take any away, so you might as well start simple. The key to this is making sure that everything is so cold. So I've actually had the bowl of my stand mixer in the freezer all evening while we've been baking, and it is ice cold. I also have the whisk attachment that I'm going to use to whip up our whipped cream in the freezer. The only mistake that you can really make with whipped cream is letting it go for too long and it becoming butter. So you really want to look for that sweet spot where it's forming stiff peaks when you pick it up and it looks nice and light and fluffy. Once it starts to separate, that becomes buttermilk and butter, and you don't want to do that. That is a very easy way to make homemade butter, which I love to do and I'll have to do with y'all sometime soon, but we don't want to do that today. We just want homemade whipped cream. So make sure to keep your eye on it and don't let it go too far. Oh my gosh, that is so delicious. It truly tastes like Cool Whip, like homemade Cool Whip is really what it is. I ended up doing about 1.5 tablespoons of powdered sugar, so that's what I love. And it's important to know that 1 cup of heavy whipping cream will equate to 2 cups of whipped cream. That can maybe be helpful if you're planning on how much you want to have, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the fridge until our pie comes out. If I was right away going over to someone's house, I would probably top all of the whipped cream onto the pie and serve it that way, and that's how I will probably do it on Thanksgiving Day when I make this again. But for now, I'm just gonna leave the whipped cream on the side and we can plate it together when we want a slice at home. Okay, since we finished the homemade whipped cream and we're still waiting for the pumpkin pie to finish, I thought it would be the perfect time to try our pecan pie. It's been a couple of hours now, so it's fully set, and I just cut a really small piece so it didn't come out super like a full big piece, but I'm sure it's gonna be delicious, so let's give it a try. And it's only fitting I'm using my great-grandmother Margaret's silver cutlery that was passed down to me, so it's always special to use with one of her recipes. The filling that we made just becomes the most luscious consistency in the oven. The pie crust is so delicious, and then the addition of the pecans, it gives it that extra crunch, and they also kind of caramelize in the filling while they're baking. Love it with the homemade whipped cream. It couldn't be better. This is such a nostalgic recipe to me, and it truly is the best pecan pie recipe I've ever made or eaten. It's so simple and truly so delicious. It doesn't leave you wanting anything more. Just the best. Okay, our pumpkin pie is out of the oven. It looks so beautiful. I love how the crust turned out. The filling looks so custardy, and I think it's gonna set really well. We have to give it quite a while to set because you don't want to cut it when it's hot at all, and you definitely don't want to cut it when it's not quite set. So I'm gonna wait until the morning to fully cut it. I am just so proud of how it turned out. It's truly the best pumpkin pie recipe, and like I said before, if you are a person who has not loved pumpkin pie in the past, you've got to try this out. It is so custardy and vanilla-y and spicy and just so good. You should try it out if you are looking for a new fun recipe. Thank you all so much for being here with me today and enjoying a little holiday festivity together. I hope that this video got you a little bit more in the holiday spirit and ready to bake your heart away, and I hope that your Thanksgiving is full of sweet time with family or friends. Even if you're by yourself, I hope that you do the things that you love and have a cozy day at home. Maybe bake something special just for you. But I hope that this video gave you inspiration to have a very cozy Thanksgiving, and I hope that this video gave you some fun ideas for maybe some new recipes to try this Thanksgiving if you want to mix things up a little bit, or we can just bake along with each other and enjoy the Thanksgiving festivities together. But I love this time of year. It's so special to me, and it always just feels so cozy and sweet, and I feel like it always sends us into Christmas time in such a good place. So I just treasure this time of year, and I'm really looking forward to baking these recipes again on Thanksgiving, and I hope that you also have a beautiful Thanksgiving day and a beautiful holiday season. I will see you lots more after Thanksgiving for so much cozy Christmas content, so make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of that, and leave me a comment letting me know what your favorite part of Thanksgiving is, and if you're planning to bake or cook anything, let me know what you're planning to make. I would love to see y'all's favorite recipes and just hear what you're looking forward to about the holiday. I'm really thankful for y'all being here, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye!